She thought about kicking a black man out of a car dealership unjustly, but bitterly regretted it. Clara had always been an ambitious young woman. From a young age, she understood that to succeed in this world, you had to be cunning, competitive, and leave no room for failure. Born into a modest family, she had seen her parents struggle to make ends meet, and she had promised herself that her life would be different. She would not have to count her expenses, worry about tomorrow, or suffer the weight of deprivation. She wanted to shine, to succeed, to belong to this exclusive circle of winners, those who never had to look at the price before buying. A saleswoman in one of the city's most prestigious car dealerships, Clara saw her job not as a simple job, but as a springboard. She dreamed of climbing the ladder, going from saleswoman to executive, and then perhaps one day running her own dealership. Her gaze was always fixed on the ideal model. A brilliant career, luxury cars, a carefree life where she would be admired as much for her charisma as for her success. She mastered the art of persuasion, knew how to flatter clients, how to manipulate expectations and play with appearances. Her colleagues respected her for her confidence, her ability to close difficult sales, and her natural talent for identifying buyers in an instant. But behind her impeccable professionalism, Clara also made silent judgments. It wasn't that she considered herself racist. No, of course not, she would never have admitted that, even to herself. But in her mind, she had categorized the customers into different categories. There were those who deserved his immediate attention, businessmen in expensive suits, local celebrities, heirs whose watches were worth more than a standard car. Then there were the curious, those who came in to dream but left without buying. And finally, there were those she subconsciously deemed unsuitable for this world of luxury. Not that they weren't allowed to enter, of course, but rather that she doubted they had the means or legitimacy to claim these exceptional vehicles. That morning, the sun hit the dealership window with force, casting golden reflections on the immaculate bodies. The space shone under the neon lights, each car resplendent, each detail designed to evoke dreams and exclusivity. The subtle smell of new leather hung in the air, and the metallic shine of the bodywork seemed to vibrate in the artificial light. Clara had prepared carefully. Her fitted suit hugged her forms with studied elegance, her hair was straightened with precision, and her lipstick was a sober red, calculated to inspire both confidence and seduction. She controlled the image she sent as much as the technical sheets of the cars she sold. She was ready for the day, but especially for this client. An influential businessman was due to stop by in the morning. A man who, according to rumors, was looking for a new model to complete his collection. A potential buyer of those who never asked the question of price, who signed checks without discussion, for the simple pleasure of adding a piece of jewelry to their garage. Clara was ready to shine, ready to land a sale that could mark a turning point in her career. She was waiting for the arrival of this long-awaited customer when another man pushed open the dealership door. He wasn't what she thought he would be. He entered alone, with a measured approach, a natural confidence which did not seek to impress. He wore a suit that was elegant but not extravagant, a neat cut, impeccable shoes, but nothing ostentatious. His gaze was calm, observant, almost analytical. He moved without haste, his eyes sweeping the space with sincere but relaxed interest. Clara observed him quickly, a furtive look but full of instant judgments. A single man, well-dressed, but not enough. Not the usual profile of luxury buyers. Maybe a consultant, a high-level employee, but certainly not a man capable of buying one of the most expensive models in the showroom. It was a fleeting, almost unconscious thought, but one that immediately influenced his attitude. An inner voice whispered, "He can't afford this car." But what intrigued him even more was that he headed directly towards one of the most prestigious models in the showroom. A sparkling black sedan, an exceptional model, with a tailor-made interior and customizable finishes. A vehicle designed for the elite. Clara frowned slightly. This type of car attracted true connoisseurs, wealthy customers who knew exactly what they wanted and had the means to afford it. She then decided to intervene, her professional smile plastered on her face, her tone carefully balanced between warmth and authority. She approached elegantly, her gaze displaying a studied mix of kindness and control.
Hello, sir.
How can I help you today? Clara said, her tone kind but a little condescending, a polite smile plastered on her lips. She had learned to control this smile, to make it perfect, to dose it just enough so that the other person did not have the impression that he was being manipulated. But in reality, there was something more behind this mask of professionalism. A subtle judgment, a quick assessment. She scrutinized the man in front of her, analyzing his outfit, his behavior, trying to place him in one of her mental categories. And from what she saw, he didn't match the archetype of the customer she imagined could afford a luxury car. David slowly turned his head towards her. His dark, almost unfathomable eyes met hers, and a warm, but discreet smile appeared on his lips. A smile that was not that of someone surprising or unsettled, but rather that of a man who knew perfectly well where he was and what he wanted. I'm interested in this model in particular, he said calmly, his voice deep but steady. Clara, although internally surprised by the simplicity and clarity of his response, did not let anything show. She had expected a more hesitant start to the conversation, signals of uncertainty, something that might justify her condescending approach. But it was nothing of the sort. He hadn't tried to justify himself, and that, paradoxically, put her on the defensive. She took a deep breath to keep calm and launched into her sales pitch. Her words were measured, professional, but as she spoke, a small inner voice began to surface, influenced by her ingrained prejudices, even if she refused to admit it. She had already placed this man in a box, probably a dreamer or occasional shopper, but definitely not a serious buyer. She hesitated for a moment before asking her question, a little too mechanically. Have you ever considered taking a look at other models? Maybe a little more affordable options, depending on your needs. The phrase seemed innocuous, but there was an undertone of condescension that she couldn't quite hide. She tried to offer him an alternative, but her mind, disconnected from David's possible realities, told her that this man was not ready to commit to such a high expense. It was almost a certainty, at least in his mind. David looked into her eyes, a glint of astonishment in his eyes, but he did not react with anger or even a gesture of impatience. He remained calm, so calm that Clara, once again, felt slightly unsettled. No, I am very interested in this model. His voice was firm, but without any aggression. This made him even more impressive to Clara. He knew what he wanted, and that seemed to be enough. For some reason she couldn't quite put her finger on, her certainties were wavering. Clara, although disturbed by his calm, decided to continue. She wanted at all costs to convince him to change his mind, convinced that the sale could escape her if she did not insist. His eyes became more piercing, his tone more convinced. You know, sometimes another model might better suit your lifestyle. She even allowed herself a small smile, thinking that she was acting kindly, doing him a favor. David, who was beginning to perceive the underlying derision in his words, remained impassive. A wave of annoyance passed through him, but he didn't raise his voice. He wasn't the type to get carried away by emotions. I assure you it's the one I want, he replied simply. He didn't have to explain, but he did it to emphasize the urgency of the situation. And I'm totally capable of buying it. He let these words escape his lips with disarming calm, like a simple truth that he spoke without arrogance, but with unwavering confidence. Clara, stung by this quiet but firm declaration, tried to regain control of the situation. She gestured towards the other model she thought would be more suitable, but something in the air had changed. His arrogance, although well controlled, crept into his words, a slight irony tinging his suggestion. Perhaps it would be best to check that with our principal, she said, almost defiantly, thinking that he would never be able to afford the car. She didn't realize the seriousness of what she was saying, because in her mind, it was just a simple suggestion, like she always did. But the words came out colder, more calculated than she would have liked. David, now clearly annoyed, was about to retort, but he stopped himself, a smirk appearing on his lips. Before he could say anything, the front door burst open. A man entered, accompanied by two other people. Clara froze. He was not like the other customers who crossed the threshold of the dealership. This man was tall, charismatic, dressed in a tailored suit with impeccable lines. He exuded an aura of power and authority, like a calm warlord, and his piercing black eyes were not those of an average man. Clara's instinct immediately told her that he should not be underestimated. However, she didn't know who he was, and that troubled her. She felt a form of immediate respect, almost embarrassment at the intensity of his gaze. David then stood up, calmly, and walked towards him. The man held out his hand, and David shook it firmly. They exchanged a few words in low voices, but Clara could only hear distant whispers. Suddenly, the man in the tailored suit turned towards her. A slight smile appeared on his lips, a smile that seemed more of a signal than a simple gesture of courtesy. "Hello, I see that you have met my partner." The man's voice was deep, marked by calm authority. The words rang through the air with an impact she couldn't ignore. Clara, her face suddenly pale, had no time to react. Her thoughts blurred as she stared at the man in front of her, and her whole world seemed to come to a halt in an instant of icy clarity. This man, the stranger whom she had taken for an ordinary customer, was in reality much more than a simple customer. He was the owner of the dealership, a businessman recognized in the automobile industry. Not only was he one of the most powerful investors in the region, but he was also the one who shaped the company, who propelled it to the top of the business hierarchy. David, on the other hand, was his business partner, a respected man, at the head of several successful businesses. She had just realized her error in judgment, and the magnitude of this realization was suffocating her. His heart raced, pounding in his ears with an almost painful intensity. An embarrassing warmth invaded his face, his cheeks taking on a bright red hue that betrayed his confusion. The silence around her became heavy, suffocating. The humiliation she felt was palpable, a wave of shame surging through her, making her almost tremble under the weight of her own mistakes. She tried to pull herself together, to keep a professional facade, but her words were lost in a clumsy attempt at an apology, which she already knew was insufficient to repair what she had messed up. David, with icy calm, looked at her without animosity, but with a clarity of judgment which pierced her like a cleaver. His deep black eyes did not seek to humiliate him, but were filled with a quiet certainty, that of a man who knew exactly what had just happened and who did not tolerate any form of ignorance or arrogance. "You made a mistake," he said in a measured, almost detached voice, "but I'm sure you didn't do it maliciously." His words rang out like cold truth, without anger, but so precise that Clara felt her legs weaken under the impact of her own clumsiness. It was not an excuse. It was an observation. He did not seek to destroy her, but he offered her no escape. David was above that, above what she thought she could do or say to regain some form of control. His words were not there to put her in her place, but to confront her with her own limitation, her ignorance, her erroneous judgment. The owner of the dealership, having observed the scene with icy discretion, then intervened, his voice taking on a serious and solemn tone. "We do not tolerate this kind of behavior here." He let out a short pause before continuing, his words heavy with meaning. "It is important that everyone is treated with respect, regardless of their appearance." His eyes rested on Clara with an imposing coldness, and in his gaze, Clara felt all the authority of a man who had built his fortune on respect for the principles he enunciated. He wasn't there to forgive her. He was there to remind him that morality and integrity were the only truths that mattered in this universe. Clara suddenly felt tiny. A strange feeling, mixed with shame and confusion, overwhelmed her. She had instinctively believed that she could manipulate the situation to her advantage. His actions had not only tarnished his reputation, but exposed his deep-rooted prejudices. She had acted not based on the reality of the situation, but according to stereotypes that she had not even bothered to question. A veil of guilt covered his mind, preventing him from finding words. She was aware, with painful acuteness, that her mistake went much deeper than simple disagreement. It was a lapse in judgment that could potentially scar her for life. David, observing the scene, waved at him, almost indifferently. A minimal gesture, but symbolic. It offered him the opportunity to apologize, to correct his words, but it was clear that the situation was now much bigger than a simple misunderstanding. Clara realized this, with a pang in her heart. It was not just a matter of humility, but a deep awareness of the social mechanisms she had unconsciously nurtured. A few minutes later, David and the dealership owner walked away to discuss upcoming business, while Clara was left alone. His hands were slightly trembling, and his head was lowered, like an invisible burden weighing on his shoulders. The gaze of the other employees weighed heavily on her, loaded with silent reproaches. Clara knew, at that precise moment, that this day would mark an irreversible turning point in her career. The shame she felt was palpable, but even more, she knew that her professional life had just been, in one way or another, marked by this mistake. The hardest part was yet to come: how to bounce back after such a gap. She had been confronted with her own prejudices, and this shock forced her to face reality. She now understood that admitting her mistakes was the only path to real change. But this change, as necessary as it was, would be difficult, painful, and long. She knew that this process would begin with the acceptance of her own failing, the realization that her superficial judgments had not only failed the situation, but had caused her to hurt someone who, more than just a customer, deserved respect and consideration. Clara then committed herself, internally, to learning a lesson from this incident.
Don't ever let your prejudices rule your actions again.
But more than that, she knew that this change would not come from simple awareness. It would come from constant inner work, a process of deconstructing one's thoughts, one's habits, so that such injustice never happens again. It would be a difficult path, but she was willing to take it.